Hi, and welcome to InFocus. This is Jabbar Al-Obaidi. Today, we will talk about a country in Africa. It's Cape Verde. And with me through Zoom, Dr. and Ambassador George Tolentino, who is visiting Bridgewater State University for this academic year. Started actually in the fall, and now we are in spring 2020. The ambassador served his country in different capacities. First of all, he's not just an ambassador, but he's a scholar, and he's an author, jurist, and career diplomat. He fulfilled important roles in the government of his country, Cape Verde. Served as advisor to former President Antonio Montorio. Served as Minister of Defense and a Minister of Foreign Affairs. Represented his country as ambassador to Germany, Finland, the Czech Republic, and Spain. Mr. Ambassador, it's a pleasure having you in InFocus. And I know, as I said, the whole schedule and all whatever you have on your calendar was shifted due to COVID-19. How does this feel, and how do you cope with it?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please allow me, first of all, to thank you for this opportunity to be in your program. It's for me a real pleasure and honor. I myself, I've been here in Bridgewater for a short time now. It is a real pleasure for me to be here. Indeed, a unique opportunity to exchange, to interact with a wide array of people with different experiences coming from different walks of life. And it is indeed an opportunity for personal enrichment, but also to exchange and to bring about my own experience in some areas, some topics of interest. The program that we have in mind at the beginning, it suffered indeed some changes. We have to adapt to this current situation, deriving from the COVID-19 pandemic. But anyway, we have been busy, we have been working, mostly in this new way of doing business. I think we have been able to put together a set of ideas, a set of proposals for the near future, namely in what it is related to this field of academic interest, which is the American-Cape Verdean relations.
So you work in Bridgewater State University, affiliated with the Institute, Cape Verde Institute?
The Pedro Pires Institute for Cape Verdean Studies.
Of Cape Verdean Studies, just on Bridgewater State campus, or throughout New England or in Massachusetts?
Yes, there are other institutions that have been, let's say, affiliated to this line of work. We have been coordinating, and I think as I just mentioned, we've been able to bring about a set of ideas, some new ideas, some proposals that should lead us to.
So what are these ideas and these proposals? I mean, could you share with us some?
Yes, one of the major goals right now for the institute is to put in place and start as soon as possible a new course addressed to the Cape Verde and American relations. And the idea is precisely to offer to a wider audience the opportunity of learning about these relations. There are relations, long-standing relations. They started more than 200 years ago. We had recently the opportunity of celebrating the bicentennial of those relations. They have been through times growing in different fields strongly, and we believe that there is indeed a field of interest that should better exploited, better taught, and indeed offer this opportunity to many people, especially young people, as we believe. It should have different components, but basically the historical component, explaining how those relations started in early 19th century and how they developed and what is their shape nowadays and what could be the shape in the future that we all desire.
So, Mr. Ambassador, this long-standing relationship, bilateral relationships with the United States, are there basic components or strategic components that you would like to talk about?
Yes, definitely. I should say that the most important trait right in the beginning of this relationship was precisely the strategical one. At that time, the United States had already concrete interest in the Atlantic region, particularly in the area where Cape Verde is located. And Cape Verde did play an important role as the logistical platform for the United States, namely for the US ships that were traveling namely to Brazil, but also to other parts of Africa, namely the West African coast. By that reason, right in the beginning, precisely in 1818, the United States of America opened its first general consulate in the sub-Saharan Africa, in Cape Verde, precisely with the objective of serving the American interests in that area, namely extending support to the American ships that was in that region at that time. And that general consulate did play an important role in the strengthening of the relations between the Cabo Verde, at that time a Portuguese colony, and the United States of America. So at the beginning, we had this strategical component. Nowadays, I believe that the most important component in the bilateral relations between the two states is the strategical component, namely the cooperation in the defense sector. At least it's the sector that has been growing in a very consistent manner in the recent years. We have indeed a cooperation in this field that is a very strong one, with expression, namely in the field of training of the Cape Verde military personnel, in the support for the strengthening of our national Coast Guard, and essentially in a bilateral cooperation in the struggle against global threats that have indeed a major impact in that region, namely and especially the countering the narco traffic that comes from the south, namely from some countries in Latin America, and with the objective of reaching Europe and United States of America. The bilateral cooperation in this field has been successful. We have indeed some important bilateral legal instruments that had been signed, especially the most important between them, the bilateral agreement on the cooperation for maritime security, which was signed in 2013. I remember that because I was the Minister of Defense at that time. Most recently, another one was signed, that is the so-called SOFA, it is the Standards of Forces Agreement, which is intended to create a framework of assurances, legal assurance for the military personnel that is present in Cape Verde.
So
precisely in this context of countering those global threats.
So, Mr. Ambassador, you serve in really both, I think, essential ministries, as you were the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yes.
Now, during that time, what are the most accomplishments in terms of security, immigration, trade, and also the well-being of the bilateral relations between the United States and Cape Verde?
Yes. Following on what I just mentioned, we managed to bring a major push on these bilateral relations in the field of defense. We organized the very first bilateral talks, strategic talks in Washington at the end of 2015. And that meeting was, this strategic high-level meeting was important in terms of creating a bilateral framework of understanding for some particular topics, namely maritime security, but also the question of the management of the migration agenda between the two countries. We had at that time some issues in this field of the immigration, namely the possibility of some deportation, and at that level we were able to start conversations aiming at creating a framework that could lead us to a better management of this question of the migration. And I believe the results, few years from then, the results are very good in this sense.
Now, how you characterize the relationship between the two countries? I mean, specifically in terms of the collaboration and in the area of education, and also in the area of commerce.
Yes, I think we are now in what one could call the second phase of those bilateral relations. There were those historical ones since the beginning up the independence of Cape Verde. And then we started the second phase, being Cape Verde an independent nation, a sovereign state. The US were one of the first countries to recognize independence of Cape Verde, to open an embassy in Cape Verde. And since then, the relations have been growing in a very consistent manner. They are exceptional relations, bilateral relations, and they cover a wide array of fields, namely education, higher education. Many Cape Verdeans have had the opportunity of getting their training here in the US since the 70s. And now we are paving the way for a different cooperation, which is the cooperation in the field of high-level education, namely between institution here in the US and institution in Cape Verde, since Cape Verde has now its own institutions in this sector. In this field, the Bridgewater State University has been, I should say, spearheading this message of the necessity, the importance, the strategic importance of this cooperation in the field of higher education, and indeed in the field of science, aiming at improving the conditions in Cape Verde, but also creating a framework of exchanges between Cape Verdean institutions and institutions here in Cape Verde. Not only Bridgewater, but Bridgewater is, for the work it has been developing, it's well placed to play a role as, let's say, the coordinating place, the coordinating platform for these relations between Cape Verde and higher educations here in the United States of America. In that sense, it is my feeling that the Pedro Pires Institute for Cape Verdean Studies has been created precisely with the objective of bringing more attention to the specificities of the Cape Verdean topics, namely migration, namely the contribution of the Cape Verdean communities here in the United States, namely in this New England region from the beginning, from the starting of the migration movement from Cape Verde to the United States. Let's not forget that the Cape Verdeans were the first African nationals to migrate to the US on a voluntary basis, and these communities have been growing since then, and they have now a very important presence here in the United States, particularly in this New England region.
Indeed. So, Mr. Ambassador, I mean, I have to ask you this question about the COVID-19 and the coronavirus. Yes. How is it the situation in your country back home? And I'm sure you are in constant contact with the larger community, the Cape Verde community in Massachusetts. Could you briefly shed some lights on that, please?
Yes. The situation here in the Cape Verdean community is something that's very, very worrisome. We had so far some deaths here in the community, and the community is one of the most affected by the pandemic in this region. That is linked to the social conditions of the community, the type of work that they do. Most of them are frontline workers, the so-called essential worker, which means that they are exposed to the virus. We have to recall the housing conditions, and social conditions that is directly linked to the results of this pandemic, the impact of this pandemic in the community. Fortunately, some work have been done by Cape Verdean organizations, by the city, under the coordination of the mayors, and we believe that the results will be positive in the near future, namely in terms of assuring better conditions to the community, and better knowledge of the challenge that is posed, and assuring better access to the health
certainly we'll all hope so, to make sure that they get the attention from the health officials, and as you mentioned that. How about back home? I mean, briefly, are they doing fine? Is it the situation under control?
It is somehow under control. It started in one of our islands, in the island of Boa Vista, with a foreign citizen, who was a tourist at that time. He was in one of the major hotels with many people at that time in that hotel, and that's how the contamination process started. That island was closed immediately after that, and the process of containment have been managed in a very positive way. After that, we had cases on other islands, namely in the island of Santiago, in the island of São Vicente, and the state of national emergency was declared for 15 days. Then it was reinstated for a second time, and now it's in place only for 2 islands, namely this island of Boa Vista and the island of Santiago, which means that on the other islands the situation is under control.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear.
Yes, please.
This is great to hear. As an African nation, and you play a role in the international and global relations. Recently, the United States decided, at least for now, to actually cut the funds to the World Health Organization, WHO. And as you know, I mean, I read a lot of press releases from the regional offices of the World Health Organization. They are a bit worried about this. So let me ask you this question. Is it the time right, or is it right altogether that to stop funding to the WHO, please?
That was a bad news for the world, for the WHO in particular, but it was especially bad news for the African countries, which depends a lot on the work of the health organization, the WHO. Why? Because we are talking about countries where the health conditions, the health system are very fragile, where the populations are exposed to social conditions very, 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 very poor, namely the poor housing conditions, the fragile system of work, and this health system in Africa do need the assistance of the WHO, namely in terms of drugs that could be made available, but also in terms of skilled personnel that could be displaced to those African nations. All of that means that we need an organization sufficiently funded, and when we, in the midst of a pandemic, such an important source as the American funds to the WHO, they are cut out of the blue. That is indeed bad news for, especially to the African nations, as I said.
Mr. Ambassador, we have a short time. What's the relation between that diplomatic relation and also, you know, the comprehensive relations with China? Because, you know, now you see there is a kind of competition between the United States and China, especially in time of COVID-19. So what's the relation between your country and China at this point?
Yes, China has now a very strong presence in Africa. I'd say in almost every African nation, one would find a Chinese strong presence nowadays in different fields. Health, education, trade, every field. The Chinese, they are there. And they are also in Cape Verde since the beginning. We are also one of the first nations to open an embassy in Cape Verde. They have been extending assistance in different fields. This presence have been growing in a very consistent manner since the beginning. We have now even a Chinese community established there, and even cultural exchanges between the two countries. And particularly in this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, they have been extending concrete cooperation to Cape Verde, namely in terms of equipment for the health personnel, but also masks that had been extended to the population in a larger sense.
You know, we are trying to push this call for global Africa support, which is GAS, GAS, especially now. Any you know, message you wanna, you know, share with our audience and also to those who probably are part of the decision making?
This COVID-19 pandemic is showing us how small we are and how interdependent we are one from the other in terms of people, but also in terms of nations. We are all equals, and the future, we should take this opportunity to learn, to think, and to understand that the responses should be global responses, coordinated responses, and we should be all of them, all of us, great or smaller nations, taking care of each other in the future better than we did so far.
Ambassador George Tolentino, thank you so much for your time, and I wish you good health and all the success with your project to serve both countries, the United States and your historic, really, and beautiful country, Cape Verde. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you so much.